Welcome. Settle yourself comfortably, perhaps with your head resting on a pillow, your body supported, and the day slowly fading into quiet. This is your time to listen, or not to listen, as you wish. The words you hear are meant not to excite, but to calm, to carry you gently back through time, into the rhythm of lives long past. Tonight, we are traveling into one of the darkest, yet most fascinating chapters of human history. The years of the Black Death. It was a time when the known world trembled under an invisible force. A disease that crept through towns and villages, reshaping not just bodies, but societies, economies, and even the way people thought about life and death. And yet, beyond the fear and tragedy, there was still the steady rhythm of existence. People still woke each morning. They still worked, tended to their families, cooked their bread, and tried to carry on as best they could. Allow your mind to drift there, to imagine, and also to let go. For this is not a story to trouble you, but one to ease you into stillness. And so, we begin. Imagine yourself in a small European town in the middle of the 14th century.
Ow.
The year might be 1348 or 1349. The air is cool, perhaps damp with the scent of rain and earth. You wake in a narrow bed, perhaps stuffed with straw. Around you, the wooden walls creak faintly, and smoke from last night's fire lingers in the air. Life is simple, but it is also fragile. There is no running water to greet you in the morning. Instead, you fetch it from a well or a nearby stream, carried in heavy buckets that make your shoulders ache. Food is plain, and sometimes scarce. A coarse bread, a little cheese, perhaps a stew of beans or barley if you are fortunate. Meat is rare and mostly salted to last through the months. Now imagine that beyond these daily challenges, there is a shadow always present. People whisper about it in hushed tones. Sickness spreading across the land. You hear it in the market, where stalls are fewer now as many merchants stay away. You hear it in church, where prayers rise not only for the soul, but for protection from the unseen. Your own body is weary from work, long hours in the fields, or perhaps bending over a loom, or tending animals. And in the midst of that weariness, you wonder each morning, will today bring safety, or will it bring illness? It is difficult to describe how constant the presence of the plague must have felt. Might not see it immediately, but you hear stories from nearby towns, of families who vanish in a week, of streets where carts carry the silent forms of neighbors away. The rhythm of life continues, but always with that undercurrent of dread. The homes you pass are modest. Wattle and daub walls, thatched roofs, floors packed with earth. Fires burn low to conserve wood. The air is thick with smoke and with the scent of damp straw. Cleanliness, in the modern sense, is rare. People wash only occasionally, often more concerned with warmth than with hygiene. The idea of germs of microscopic causes lies centuries ahead. And so the sickness moves unseen, like a traveler in the night. You rise to work regardless. In the fields, mud clings to your boots. In the workshop, tools are heavy and the hours are long. The rhythm of daily labor is a comfort in itself, steady and familiar, even as whispers of the disease grow louder. And yet there are moments of community. In the evenings, neighbors gather. Stories are told by the fire, perhaps songs sung in low voices. Faith is strong, a constant companion. You might walk to church, bells tolling gently in the air, and join others in prayer. For many, this is the only anchor against the tide of fear. Still, you cannot escape the uncertainty. Imagine yourself lying down at night, listening to the sounds of your village, the dogs barking distantly, the creak of timbers, the hush of wind against the walls. We breathe in and out, and wonder if tomorrow will look the same. To live through the Black Death years was not only to endure hunger or cold or hard work, it was to carry the weight of uncertainty each and every day. A constant struggle, made heavier by the lack of understanding. And this, perhaps more than anything else, is why you would not last long in such a world. And yet, people did last. They endured. They kept living, step by step, moment by moment. Because that is what ordinary life demands. Even in the shadow of the plague, as we leave the quiet rhythms of ordinary daily life, let us turn to one of the more dramatic responses to the Black Death. A movement of people who wandered from town to town, seeking meaning in the midst of despair. These were the flagellants. Imagine the setting. A European town square in the year 1349. The houses lean inward, their upper stories almost touching above the narrow street. The smell of wood smoke lingers, mingling with the odor of tanned leather, manure, and damp earth. The town itself feels subdued, as though holding its breath. And then, in the distance, you hear a sound, low chant. Voices rising together in slow rhythm. Figures appear around the corner. Men dressed in simple robes, their heads bowed, their faces solemn. They walk barefoot, their feet dusty or muddy from miles of travel. In their hands they carry whips, and as they move, they strike themselves in a slow, deliberate rhythm, believing that this suffering will cleanse the sins of the world. The flagellant movement began as a reaction to the devastation of the plague. At its heart was a belief that the sickness was punishment for human sin. If communities could show repentance, not only through prayer, but through physical suffering, then perhaps God's anger would be soothed, and the disease would relent. They traveled in groups of dozens, sometimes hundreds, moving from one town to the next. Their arrival could bring both fascination and unease. Some people saw them as holy men, chosen to remind the world of its sins. Others regarded them with suspicion or even fear, as though their presence brought trouble rather than peace. Picture yourself in the crowd, standing among your neighbors as these men process slowly into the square. Their chanting fills the air, a steady hum that echoes against the timbered walls. They kneel in unison, reciting prayers, then rise again, continuing their ritual. The sound of the whips striking against fabric and skin creates a rhythm that is at once strange and mesmerizing. But life among the flagellants was far from easy. They renounced comfort. They ate little, sleeping in barns or on the ground as they moved from place to place. They lived by charity, sustained by those who offered bread or water in exchange for blessings. Their purpose was clear, yet their existence was harsh, demanding a kind of endurance that few could maintain for long. In some towns, the flagellants gained followers. Ordinary people joined them, abandoning homes and families in search of meaning. For others, their presence was troubling, a reminder that despair could spill over into frenzy. Church authorities grew increasingly uneasy. At first, the flagellants seemed to embody piety, but soon, the church declared them dangerous, spreading not faith but disorder, and undermining the authority of priests. Still, for a time, they were a common sight on Europe's roads. Moving steadily, barefoot, chanting, striking in unison, they were like a tide flowing across the land. And in their march, one can sense both the desperation of the age and the resilience of human beings who refuse simply to surrender. The story of the flagellants is not one of success. They did not end the plague. They did not bring salvation. Yet they reveal to us something about those years. How people confronted with the unknown reached for answers in whatever form they could find. As you picture these processions, allow yourself to imagine the stillness after they passed. The square grows quiet again, only the faint echo of their chants remaining in the air. Life resumes. The baker shaping loaves of coarse bread. The children playing near the well, the animals shifting in their pens. The extraordinary folds back into the ordinary, as it always does. And with that, we turn our gaze from the movements of people to the mysteries they left behind, traces of the Black Death years that remain hidden beneath the earth, waiting to be uncovered. Now, let us shift from the streets and processions of the living to the quiet traces that remain beneath the ground. When the Black Death swept through Europe, it left not only memories and stories, but also physical evidence. Silent testaments to how communities tried to cope with the sheer scale of loss. These are the plague pits. Imagine standing in a modern city, perhaps London or Florence, or Paris. Beneath the paved streets and tall buildings lie layers of history, built one atop another across the centuries. And in some places, archaeologists have uncovered large burial sites, where hundreds, sometimes thousands of people were laid to rest together. These were not ordinary cemeteries, carefully planned and tended over decades. They were emergency measures, created when the usual rhythms of burial could no longer keep pace with the needs of the living. Picture yourself in the 14th century. A parish churchyard would normally serve as the final resting place for a village or a neighborhood. Graves were dug by hand, marked with stones or wooden crosses, and families visited to say prayers for their loved ones. But as the plague spread, the pace of death was overwhelming. Churchyards filled quickly. Priests could not keep up with the rituals. The ground itself became crowded. And so, towns began to dig great pits, wide, deep trenches in which many bodies could be placed together. From a modern perspective, the idea may seem unsettling. But for those living in the plague years, it was a matter of necessity. Archaeologists today have studied these sites with great care. At East Smithfield in London, for example, excavations revealed rows of carefully arranged remains. Despite the desperation of the time, there was still an effort to preserve dignity. The bodies were laid out in ordered rows, often with a shroud or simple covering. Even in chaos, there was a desire to provide respect, to acknowledge each life. These discoveries tell us more than simply how people died. By studying the bones, researchers have uncovered clues about health, diet, and the conditions of life in the 14th century. They have found signs of malnutrition, of childhood illnesses carried into adulthood, of teeth worn down by coarse bread and grit from stone-ground flour. Each skeleton is like a quiet biography, written in bone rather than in words. The plague pits also hold mysteries. DNA testing has revealed the presence of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible for the plague, confirming what written records had suggested. Yet questions remain. Why did the disease strike so hard in some areas and not in others? Why did it fade after a few years, only to return in waves across centuries? The answers are still debated, still uncertain, still unfolding. As you imagine these vast burial grounds, try to picture not only the sorrow, but also the resilience. Communities did what they could, with the knowledge they had, in circumstances they had never faced before. And though the earth closed over the plague pits, life above carried on. Fields were tilled, bread was baked, children were born, and generations continued. There is something quietly reassuring in this. Even in the presence of such devastation, humanity adapted. The rhythm of life, though altered, did not cease. And so, from the silence of the plague pits, let us now turn our gaze upward again. To those who lived differently, to the wealthy and powerful, whose experience of the Black Death contrasted so strongly with that of ordinary villagers. Their halls were warmer, their meals richer, their lives insulated by privilege. And yet, even for them, the shadow of the plague was never far away. Now, let us leave behind the crowded lanes of villages and the silent depths of the plague pits, and step instead into the world of the wealthy. For while the Black Death touched every corner of society, the experience of the nobility was profoundly different from that of common people. Imagine yourself walking up a long, winding path toward a stone manor house or perhaps the fortified walls of a castle. The buildings stand tall and imposing, designed both for defense and for display. Within, the rooms are larger, brighter, and warmer than the cottages you've just left behind. Fireplaces burn with steady flames. Tapestries hang on the walls, their woven scenes softening the stone. Servants move quietly in the background, bringing food, tending fires, maintaining order. For nobles, daily life during the plague was shaped by both privilege and fear. When rumors of disease spread nearby, many retreated to their country estates, far from crowded towns. They sought safety in isolation, surrounding themselves with fewer people, limiting visitors, and closing their gates to the outside world. Meals in these halls were lavish compared to the coarse bread and porridge of the common folk. Platters of roasted meats, spiced sauces, and imported wines were set on long tables. Even in times of fear, the rituals of dining continued. Music might be played softly by minstrels, and conversation lingered late into the night. And yet, beneath this appearance of control, anxiety still pressed in. Nobles were not immune. Their wealth could shield them from hunger and cold, but not from the unseen force of disease. Some turned to scholars and physicians for protection, seeking advice in the form of remedies and charms. Others clung more tightly to religious rituals, holding private masses and commissioning prayers. Consider the writings of Giovanni Boccaccio, who described in vivid but measured tones how some Florentine elites withdrew entirely, creating closed communities of select families who lived together in walled estates, attempting to preserve joy through feasting and storytelling. His work, The Decameron, captures not only the fears of the age, but also the ways in which people of privilege sought to balance survival with comfort. Life for the powerful was not without loss. entire dynasties were shaken when heirs and lords succumbed. In some places, noble estates passed suddenly to distant relatives, reshaping the politics of regions. The plague, impartial and invisible, did not spare kings or queens. Yet the contrast remained clear. While peasants might sleep on damp straw in crowded rooms, nobles rested on feather beds behind guarded doors. Imagine yourself now in one of those grand halls. The fire crackles softly in the hearth. Candles flicker, their light glinting on polished metal plates. A lute plays gently in the corner, while nobles sit in robes of velvet or fur. Outside the walls, the countryside lies hushed, dotted with small cottages where life is far more fragile. Inside, the rhythm is steadier, cushioned by wealth. And still, the same question hangs in the air. Will tomorrow bring safety or sickness? The experience of the nobility reminds us that while the plague years were universal, they were not equal. Social class shaped not only daily life, but the very way in which fear was lived and managed. To be poor was to face hunger and uncertainty at every turn. To be rich was to be cushioned from some hardships, but never from all. And so, in tracing both sides, the cottages and the castles, the fields and the feasting halls, we see the full tapestry of the plague years, a time when humanity, in all its divisions and commonalities, faced the same shadow. As we close this segment, let the image linger of two worlds side by side. One of laborers in simple dwellings, the other of lords in high stone walls. Different in almost every way, and yet both touched by the same quiet threat, moving unseen through the land. And so, we come to the close of our journey through the Black Death years. We have walked the narrow, smoky streets of small villages, where ordinary men and women carried on with their daily lives under the constant shadow of uncertainty. We have witnessed the solemn processions of the flagellants, their chants and rituals echoing through town squares as they sought meaning in suffering. We have descended quietly into the earth, into the plague pits where history left its silent record, and we have climbed again into the halls of the powerful, where privilege offered comfort but not immunity. The plague was a force that reshaped the world, altered economies, shifted societies, and left its mark on art, literature, and faith. Yet within all this change, the rhythm of human life persisted. People continued to rise each morning, to work, to pray, to hope, and to endure. As you reflect on these lives centuries removed from your own, there is a gentle comfort in recognizing the distance. You rest tonight in a safer world, with warmth, medicine, and knowledge they could scarcely have imagined. The fears that consumed their days are not the ones that shape yours. What remains is the story, the faint echo of their existence, carried down through time.